Welcome to episode 2 of my Kawasaki Z1 engine restorations. The parts are back from the vapour blasters and new bits have arrived from Z-Power, so now we can get on with the assembly. It's always nice when the engine parts come back from the vapour blasters. They look like fresh castings, and they look just perfect reflecting the early autumn sunlight. First of all, I'm going to take the cylinder head back into the garage and start cleaning up the valves, pistons and assemble the cylinder head. When I took out all the valves, I put them in a little box corresponding to the numbers marked onto the cylinder head. So what I'm going to do is transfer those marks onto the other side of the head so I can grind the valves in, making sure they return to their original location. So using a black marker pen, I mark the ports from 1 to 8. With the ports identified and marked, the next thing I'm going to do is clean off the carbon from the crowns of the pistons and clean the valves. I first remove the piston rings from the pistons. I then use a piece of hard plastic to remove the carbon from the crown of the pistons. By using plastic, it doesn't actually scratch the aluminium. This is in fact a bit of an old circuit board I had laying around, and it's just perfect for the job. With the loose carbon removed, a quick squirt with some brake cleaner and rub with a cloth, and they're like brand new. I'm really pleased with that. With the 4 pistons cleaned, the next thing I'm going to do is clean the valves. These have a build-up of carbon on both surfaces. To easily remove the carbon, I first grip the valve in my 3-jaw chuck and use a bit of plastic to turn the carbon off. This doesn't cut the valve at all, it just takes the carbon off, leaving it virtually clean. Then I finish off with a bit of abranet cloth to polish to a shine. There we go, that's just perfect. So now I've got to repeat the process for the other 7 valves. The carbon on the exhaust valves is much harder than that on the inlet valves, but it still cleans up nicely. With all the valves cleaned, the next thing I need to do is grind them into their respective ports. To do this, you use grinding paste. I found that the old grinding paste in the 50s is much better and works much nicer than the new grinding paste, but that might just be me. With a thin smear of grinding paste on the valve, I return it to its original seat, pushing it down so it hits the head, then use a rubber suction cup to press onto the valve to rotate it backwards and forwards to grind the valve in. You apply a gentle pressure downwards and rub it backwards and forwards with your fingers, and then you get a nice smooth finish on the valve. It might take a little while, but you get there in the end. After several minutes of grinding, I clean the valve with a bit of cloth and have a look at the surface, and it's a nice and smooth grey finish, uninterrupted all the way around, which is just perfect, so that valve's now done. I now check the valve seat, and it's in perfect condition, with a nice grey finish all the way around, so I'm really pleased with that. This engine ran fine and had really good compression before I took it apart, so the valve seats are probably in very good condition anyway, but it's always best to regrind them just to make sure. I'll replace the grounding valve back into the tin and then go for the next valve, which is the inlet valve. I place a bit of fine grinding paste on the inlet valve, return it to the inlet port and grind that valve in. The inlet valves usually grind in quicker than the exhaust valves, and after a couple of minutes, this one was just perfect. And I'm really pleased to see a nice grey smooth surface to the valve. So these 2 are now done, so I can get on with the other 6. With all the valves ground in, I give the cylinder head a good clean with some brake cleaner to remove any grinding paste that may remain. And also clean out the oil feed galleries to make sure there's no media left in the vapour blasting process. Followed by a good blast of air from my airline. I feel for a good flow of air, and there's loads. I then repeat this on the other side of the cylinder head. I've now got to make some new aluminium oil gallery plugs from some aluminium bar. I take the bar over to my lathe and grip it in a 3-jaw chuck. I start to machine the diameter so it's slightly over the size of the old plugs. That'll do just nicely. With the diameter machined, I face off the end and machine a small chamfer. I now replace the cutting tool with a parting off blade to cut off the plug to length. I use the old plug to set the parting off blade in the correct position. With the plug machined, I put a bit of gasket sealer in the hole on the cylinder head and then tap the plug in. It's quite tight, but goes in just nicely. With the plug in, I now repeat the process for the other 4 holes. And here's the 4 new plugs all tapped in flush with the cylinder head. The cylinder head is now ready for assembly, so the first thing I do is put in the anti-wear cups that go underneath the valve springs. These press down into the cylinder head nicely, over the valve guides. With all 8 in place, the next thing I'm going to do is fit new valve stem seals. The valve stem seals are quite delicate and need to be handled quite carefully, so I found an easy way to install them is to use a little screwdriver and a 10mm socket, placing the 10mm socket over the screwdriver followed by the valve stem seal. Then you can put the screwdriver down inside the valve guide itself, gently press in, and it snaps in nicely without any damage at all. With the first seal installed, I repeat the process for the other 7 seals. I'm now all ready to start installing the valves. I really enjoy this stage of an engine rebuild. All the parts have been cleaned, reconditioned, replaced, new parts are lined up, and I've got fresh clean oil to apply, and it all goes back together nicely. As I install the valves, I feel slight resistance as I push them past the new valve stem seals. This is a good thing. With all the valves replaced in their original positions, I can now start fitting the springs. There are 2 springs per valve, so I first install the inner spring, then the outer spring, and then the upper cup. This is then compressed with my vintage valve spring compressor. With With the valve spring compressed, I can now insert the 2 retaining collets. The collets can be quite fiddly to install, but you have to persevere and you get there in the end. And once they're in place, you can release the valve spring compressor and everything's in place tight. So now we can progress with the next valve. As you progress inwards from the outside of the cylinder head, the valve spring compressor can be sometimes difficult to install, so you have to find the right position. But once you get there, you can tell because the spring compresses easily. With all the valves in, Charlie starts getting a bit excited and mixes up a new cocktail, and I can smell something really nice coming from the kitchen, so I go and have a quick look. And Tracy's been busy making cherry and almond cupcakes, my absolute favourite, and they've just come out the oven and they're really hot, so I'm not allowed to have one, but I can come back later hopefully. Back in the garage, I'm going to have a look at the barrels. Freshly back from vapour blasting, the bores look amazing. The vapour blasting process has cleaned the bores nicely. These are in standard size and no lip at the top, so they've hardly seen any wear at all. I'm going to check the piston to bore clearance by using a 2 thou feeler gauge, putting it in the bore next to the piston and seeing how it feels. In this instance, it's nice. It's just a nice sliding fit, which means the clearance is around 2 thou, which is close to the bottom limit for the engine. I check all 4 cylinders and they're all the same, which is a good thing. So now I'm going to use my cylinder hone to clean up the surface nicely for the new piston rings. With aluminium soft jaws fitted, I grip the barrels in the vise so I can hone the cylinders. The honing process removes a minuscule amount of material, probably about half a thou. I'm going to use my adjustable hone that has 4 stones and a micrometer adjustment, so you can actually put on a very fine cut and then you can get all the cylinders the same size. I lubricate the bores with some oil and slide the hone in and turn the adjustment until it just feels tight. Then you can insert the drive mechanism which fits into your drill into the end, start it up and go in and out and round, in and out and round, and to try and produce a crosshatch finish on the bore. I gradually increase the cut until I get a nice smooth finish. After a few minutes, I take the hone out and have a look at the bore, and it looks really nice, really smooth, with no marks. I'm really pleased with that. So with the first cylinder done, I proceed to do the second cylinder, then the third, then the fourth. With all the cylinders honed, I give the bores a thorough clean with some brake cleaner. Before I go any further, I'm going to fit the new cam chain guide. This slots into 2 slots at the top with a screw underneath that holds it in place. I apply a bit of Loctite to the thread because you don't want this screw coming loose inside the engine. There we go, that's all fitted nicely. I bought a set of new piston rings for this engine that have a modern 3-piece oil ring, so I'm going to get them out and check the gaps first before we install them onto the pistons. I insert one of the piston rings into the bore and carefully push it down with my fingers. Then I use a piston to push it in square so I can measure the gap with a feeler gauge. And this is perfect, so I can now move on to the other piston rings and check those as well. When they're all checked, I can assemble them onto the pistons. I start with a 3-piece oil ring, first putting on the expander part, making sure it's lined up nicely. Then I pick up one of the 2 blades. These are very thin, can easily be damaged, you need to be careful. I check for marks. If there's a mark on it, like an R or a T, that goes to top, but as there's not, it can go on either way round. So you very carefully slide it over the piston and drop it down into the ring groove. There we go, that's a 3-piece oil ring fitted, and that feels really nice. So now I can look at the compression rings. The compression rings do have a mark, it actually says R, so this goes to the top. And the unplated ring goes on first, in the ring position 2, and then the ring with the chrome on goes on in position 1. With the first piston fitted with new rings, I then fit rings to the other 3 pistons and return the pistons to their respective bores, ready for assembly. Well, that's the 2 top-end sub-assemblies complete, and I'm really pleased how they went together. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and in the next video I'll be assembling the bottom end, putting on the barrels and heads, doing the cam timing, so I'll see you all soon. Well, the hedgehogs came again last night, tiptoeing around, and they ate all the food, so we'll have to put out some more for tonight.